My life was a collection of quiet routines. Wake up, coffee, work from home, dinner for one, sleep. The highlight, the one crack of color in my grayscale existence, was baseball. I wasn't even a diehard fan of the team. I was a fan of the experience. The roar of the crowd, the scent of grilled onions and cheap beer, the vast green expanse under the stadium lights. It was the only place I felt part of something, even if I was just a solitary body in a sea of thousands. I always bought the same seat. Section 112, Row G, Seat 4. Close enough to see the players' expressions, far enough to feel anonymous. For 2 years, my routine at the ballpark was as predictable as my life outside of it. Find my seat, nod at the familiar faces around me, and lose myself for 9 innings. Then he started. His name, I learned from the plastic tag pinned to his crisp blue polo, was Leo. He was assigned to my section, a new variable in my carefully controlled equation. The first time I saw him, he was leaning against the concrete railing, arms crossed over a chest that seemed to strain the fabric of his uniform. He wasn't boyishly handsome. He was a man, with laugh lines already creasing the corners of his eyes and a light dusting of stubble along a sharp jaw. He had a way of standing that was utterly relaxed, yet completely in command of his small territory of steps and plastic seats. His smile was the first thing that truly registered. It was a slow, easy curve of his lips that he gave to a family struggling with a tray of nachos, and it seemed to calm the frantic energy around them instantly. I handed him my digital ticket, my phone screen glowing in the twilight of the concourse. His fingers brushed mine as he took the device, a fleeting contact that was utterly professional and yet sent a jolt straight up my arm. I told myself it was static electricity. Section 112, Row G, Seat 4, he read, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that cut through the surrounding din. He handed the phone back, and his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second too long. They were a warm, clear brown, like whiskey held up to the light. Enjoy the game, he said, and the smile he offered was smaller than the one he'd given the Nacho family, more contained, but it felt aimed directly at me. I found my seat, my heart thumping a stupid, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was a grown man, not a teenager with a crush. He was a stadium usher. He was, by all statistical and observational likelihood, straight. His easy charm was part of the job, a tool to manage crowds and de-escalate grumpy fans. The lingering look, the brush of his fingers, it was nothing. It was my own loneliness projecting meaning onto a meaningless interaction. I repeated this mantra to myself for the first 3 innings, but my eyes kept betraying me, drifting from the field to the top of the aisle where Leo stood, a steady, solid presence. Over the next few games, my observation became a quiet obsession. It was a study. I watched how he moved, with an economy of motion that spoke of innate physical confidence. I learned the cadence of his work. The first few innings were busy, a constant flow of people and tickets and questions. He'd point them to their seats, his arm extending, a brief touch on a shoulder here, a hand on an elbow there. He treated everyone with the same casual warmth, and my initial feeling of being singled out began to feel foolish. Of course he wasn't looking at me. I was just another fan. But then I would catch it. A moment when the flow of people thinned, and his gaze would sweep over the section, a shepherd counting his flock, and his eyes would land on me. It was never for long, just a beat, a pause. But it happened every game. There was no smile, no nod, just a quiet, unreadable look. My mind would race, trying to decipher it. Was he curious why I was always alone? Did he recognize me as a regular? Or was he just bored, his eyes landing on a random fixed point in the crowd? I would quickly look away, my cheeks hot, feeling like I'd been caught staring. Which, of course, I had been. The touches were the worst. They were infinitesimal, barely there, and always plausibly deniable. One game, I was coming back from the concession stand, juggling a soda and a hot dog. The aisle was tight, and as I squeezed past him, his hand came to rest for a moment on the small of my back to steady me. The warmth of his palms seeped through the thin fabric of my shirt, a brand of heat that lingered long after he'd moved away. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I just mumbled a thanks and hurried to my seat, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped my food. My internal monologue became a frantic courtroom debate. The prosecutor, a cynical, world-weary version of myself, presented the evidence. He's a friendly, handsome guy. His job is to be nice to people. He touches everyone on the back. You are projecting. You are pathetic, but the defense attorney, a hopeful, foolish romantic, would whisper back. But the way he looks at you is different. He holds your gaze. The touch on your back lasted a second too long. You felt it. The jury was always hung. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. This silent, one-sided relationship was consuming me. I'd find myself dressing a little better for the games, choosing a nicer shirt, making sure my hair was behaving. It was ridiculous. I was preening for the stadium usher. I considered changing my seat, moving to a different section, breaking the spell. It would be the smart thing to do, the self-preservationist thing. But I never did. The thought of coming to the ballpark and not seeing him, not having that little jolt of anxiety and hope, felt worse than the constant uncertainty. My gray life had a splash of color, and that color's name was Leo. I wasn't ready to go back to monochrome. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in late July. The air was thick and heavy, threatening rain. The game was against a rival team, and the stadium was packed, a tense, electric energy crackling through the stands. In the top of the seventh, the sky finally broke. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a downpour. The kind of sudden, violent summer storm that sent people scrambling for cover. The umpire called for the tarp, and a collective groan went through the crowd. Thousands of people surged from their seats toward the covered concourses. I was swept up in the tide, pressed on all sides by damp, complaining bodies. The air grew thick with the smell of wet concrete and popcorn. I found a relatively dry spot under an overhang, leaning against a pillar, watching the rain fall in solid, silver sheets. I was resigned to waiting it out, another solitary man in the crowd. Didn't bring an umbrella? The voice was right next to my ear, that low rumble I could now pick out of 1,000. I turned, startled. It was Leo. He was off his post, his uniform dark in patches from the rain. His hair was damp, clinging to his forehead. He was closer than he'd ever been before, close enough that I could smell the clean, simple scent of his soap mixed with the rain. Never do. I managed, my voice sounding tight. I like to live dangerously. He let out a soft laugh, and the sound was so much better without the stadium noise to compete with. A real risk-taker. I can tell. He leaned against the pillar next to me, our shoulders almost touching. The casual proximity sent my pulse into overdrive. This was new territory. We weren't usher and fan anymore. We were just two people waiting out a storm. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was filled with the roar of the rain on the stadium roof. I desperately searched for something to say, something clever or interesting that would justify him staying here, talking to me. "You always in this seat?" he asked, breaking the silence first. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah. Section 112, row G, seat 4. Creature of habit." "I noticed," he said simply. My heart stopped. He noticed. It wasn't my imagination. The two words were a confirmation, a small, solid piece of evidence for my hopeful inner defense attorney. "You always come alone?" he asked, his tone shifting. It was softer now, genuinely curious. The question was direct, personal. It hung in the air between us, more intimate than any of the accidental touches. "Yeah," I said, deciding on honesty. "I do." I waited for the flicker of pity in his eyes, the sympathetic nod. It never came. Instead, he just looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's better to just be with your own thoughts." He glanced out at the rain-soaked field. "I took this job for the noise. My apartment is too quiet." It was a small confession, but it felt monumental. He wasn't just the confident, charming usher. He was a man who understood being alone, who sought out the roar of a crowd to drown out the silence. In that moment, he felt less like an unattainable crush and more like a person who might just understand the quiet ache of my own life. We talked for the whole 40-minute rain delay. It wasn't profound. We talked about the team's terrible bullpen, the best place to get a burger in the city, bad summer jobs we'd had in college. He'd worked one summer painting houses, and he described the smell of the turpentine and the feeling of the sun on his back. I told him about my job as a graphic designer, how I could spend an entire day staring at a screen, moving pixels around. He listened, really listened, his eyes fixed on my face, nodding in all the right places. When they finally announced the game was resuming, a part of me was disappointed. The crowd began to stir, moving back toward the aisles. Well, I said, pushing off the pillar. Back to the game. Yeah, he said, but he didn't move. He just watched me. I'll see you in 112. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back. But this time, I didn't feel caught. I felt seen. The next few games were different. The tension was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer just in my head. It was a live wire stretching between my seat and his post at the top of the stairs. The looks he gave me were no longer ambiguous. They were definite, accompanied by a small, private smile that was just for me. He'd find excuses to walk down the aisle, checking on a non-existent issue, and his eyes would meet mine as he passed. The air crackled. The space between us felt charged, a pocket of intense awareness in the middle of the oblivious crowd. The game on the field became secondary, a backdrop for the silent drama playing out in Section 112. I was living for these small moments, these stolen glances and secret smiles. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, and I was terrified of breaking it. I didn't know what the next step was, or if there even was one. What did one do in this situation? Ask the handsome usher for his number? Invite him for a drink? The thought sent a wave of panic through me. I was good at observing, at analyzing from a safe distance. I was terrible at action. So I did nothing, content to live in this state of suspended animation, this perfect, unconsummated tension. I was happy, in a nervous, heart-pounding sort of way. But Leo, I was coming to realize, was a man of action. It was the last home game of the regular season. The team had been officially eliminated from playoff contention, so the mood was more nostalgic than tense. It was a clear, cool evening in late September, the kind of night that felt like a gentle farewell to summer. I knew there was a good chance I wouldn't see him again until next spring. The thought left a hollow space in my chest. The game ended with a meaningless win. The crowd gave a polite, appreciative cheer and began to file out. I stayed in my seat, as I often did, letting the bulk of the people leave first. I watched the grounds crew begin their work, the stadium slowly emptying, the lights seeming to grow brighter as the stands darkened. I saw Leo at the top of the aisle, saying goodbye to the last few families, ruffling a kid's hair. He saw me sitting there. He said something to his coworker, then started walking down the steps, not toward the exit, but toward me. My heart kicked into a gallop. This is it. This is not normal. Ushers don't come down to chat with the last fan in the section. He stopped at the end of my row, his hands in the pockets of his slacks. The blue polo was gone, replaced by a simple gray Henley that clung to his shoulders. Not ready to leave? He asked. His voice was quiet in the near-empty stadium. Just soaking it in, I said, gesturing to the field. Last one for a while. Yeah, he said, his eyes on my face, not the field. It is. I finally stood up, grabbing my jacket. It felt like the end of something. I had my ticket stub in my hand, a habit I'd had since I was a kid. A small, paper souvenir of the evening. I started to put it in my pocket. Hey, he said, his voice stopping me. I looked at him. He took a step closer, into the row. Now he was standing right in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes. The stadium lights caught in his hair. Can I see that? He asked, nodding toward the ticket stub in my hand. Confused, I held it out. He didn't take it from me. Instead, his fingers closed gently around mine, his thumb stroking the back of my hand as he looked down at the small piece of paper. The touch was not accidental. It was deliberate, a statement. My breath hitched. I am not breathing. My entire world has shrunk to the feeling of his thumb tracing small circles on my skin. His hand is so warm. He looked up from the ticket, his eyes dark and serious. He carefully slipped the stub from my unresisting fingers. He didn't look at it again. He just held it. What are you doing? I whispered. The words felt loud in the echoing quiet. He gave me a small, crooked smile. It wasn't the easy, charming smile he gave to the crowds. This one was something else. Nervous, maybe. Hopeful. He tucked the ticket stub into the front pocket of his jeans. I'm keeping it, he said, his voice low and steady. For next time. My mind went completely blank. Next time. He must have seen the confusion on my face, because he took another half step closer. Our bodies were inches apart. Next time, he repeated, his gaze unwavering. With me, he held my gaze for another long moment, letting the words sink in, letting me understand. Then, he gave my hand one last, gentle squeeze before letting go. He turned and walked back up the aisle without another word, disappearing into the concourse. I stood there, alone in section 112, my hand tingling where he had touched it. My heart was a drum solo in the vast, empty stadium. I felt the phantom shape of the ticket stub in my palm. For next time. With me. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. The cynical prosecutor in my head was silent, utterly defeated. The hopeful romantic was doing cartwheels. For the first time, I wasn't observing the action. I was in it, and I had no idea what to do next. My phone buzzed in my pocket an hour later. I was home, sitting on my couch in the dark, still replaying the scene in my head. I almost didn't check it. It was probably a work email, but something made me pull it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Section 112, Row G, Seat 4. My fingers trembled as I typed back. How did you get my number? The reply was instantaneous. There's a database for season ticket holders. One of the perks of the job is knowing how to use it. Hope that's okay. I stared at the screen. He had looked me up. He had gone out of his way to find me. This wasn't a whim. It was planned. It's okay, I typed back, my heart hammering. Another text came through immediately. Good. So about next time. How's Friday? And just like that, the ball was in my court. All my fears, my anxieties about making the first move, were irrelevant. He had made it for me. All I had to do was say yes. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Friday is good, I wrote, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Friday felt a lifetime away. I spent 2 days in a state of suspended panic and giddy anticipation. What did one wear for a next time with the handsome stadium usher you've been silently pining for? What did we talk about when we weren't separated by 10 rows of plastic seats and professional obligation? Would it be awkward? Would he realize he'd made a huge mistake, that I was just some boring, lonely guy and not the mysterious stranger he'd built up in his head? My brain, so accustomed to overthinking, was having a field day. He told me to meet him at a bar not far from the stadium. It was a low-key place, dark wood and dim lighting, the kind of neighborhood joint that felt lived in and comfortable. I got there 10 minutes early, my anxiety a cold knot in my stomach. I claimed a small table in the corner and nursed a beer, my eyes glued to the door. He walked in, and my breath caught. Out of his uniform, he looked different, softer. He was wearing a dark green sweater and jeans, and his hair was slightly messy, like he'd run his hands through it. He scanned the room, and when his eyes found me, that slow, easy smile spread across his face. The knot in my stomach loosened just a little. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. "You found it." "I'm good with directions," I said, cringing internally at how lame I sounded. "I figured," he grinned. "You always find your seat." The first few minutes were a little stilted. We made small talk, the same kind of talk we'd had during the rain delay, but now it felt freighted with new meaning. Every question, every answer, seemed like a test. But Leo had a way of putting people at ease. He asked me about my day, about a project I was working on, and he listened with that same focused intensity. He was halfway through his first beer when he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The playful energy was gone, replaced by the same seriousness he'd had in the stadium. "So," he began, his voice low, "I'm guessing you were a little surprised on Tuesday." "A little," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I wasn't sure what to think." "What did you think?" he asked, his gaze steady and direct. He wasn't going to let me hide. I took a breath. Here it was. The moment for honesty. My usual instinct was to deflect, to make a joke. But looking at him, at the genuine, open curiosity in his eyes, I knew I couldn't. "I thought I'd imagined all of it." I confessed, the words tumbling out. "The way you looked at me. Everything. I told myself it was just you being friendly, doing your job. That I was just some lonely guy making things up in his head." He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. My cynical prosecutor was screaming, "You've blown it. You've laid all your pathetic cards on the table." Then, he reached across the table. He didn't take my hand. He just laid his palm flat on the wood, inches from mine. An invitation. "You didn't imagine it," he said softly. "I'm very friendly. It is my job. But not with you. With you, it was different." He took a sip of his beer, his eyes never leaving mine. "I spent 2 months trying to work up the nerve to do what I did on Tuesday. Every game, I'd tell myself, today's the day, and then I'd see you, sitting there all quiet and serious, and I'd lose my nerve. My mind was reeling. He had been nervous? Confident, charming Leo. Why? I asked, the question full of all my insecurities. Why me? He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I don't know. I saw you that first day, and you just looked interesting. You looked like you had a whole world going on behind your eyes. And you have a nice smile, when you let yourself use it. I felt a blush creep up my neck. I couldn't remember the last time I'd smiled at him. I'm not very good at this, I stammered, feeling the need to warn him. This whole thing. Me neither, he said, and it sounded true. But I'm willing to be bad at it with you, if you are. My eyes dropped to his hand, still resting on the table. It was a simple gesture, an offering. All I had to do was meet it. Slowly, hesitantly, I moved my own hand forward and covered his. His skin was warm and calloused. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine. The fit was perfect. We sat like that for a while, just holding hands across the sticky bar table, the noise of the room fading into a distant hum. It was better than any line of dialogue. It was a quiet, solid promise. He paid the bill, and we walked out into the cool night air. The street was quiet. We walked without a destination, our hands still linked between us. The silence was comfortable now, easy. When we reached the corner where we'd have to part ways, we stopped under the glow of a streetlight. The moment felt charged, a question hanging in the space between us. I'm scared. This is the part where it ends. He goes his way, I go mine, and tomorrow I wake up and wonder if it was a dream. Leo must have sensed my anxiety. He squeezed my hand. I don't want to say good night yet, he said, his voice a low murmur. Me neither, I admitted. He took a step closer, using our joined hands to gently pull me toward him. He raised his other hand and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was so tender, so careful. Can I? He whispered, his eyes searching mine for permission. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. He didn't. He closed the small distance between us, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a firework kiss. It wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was quiet, and it was honest. His lips were soft, and he tasted faintly of beer and something else, something that was just him. It was a kiss of confirmation, a sealing of the unspoken things we'd been dancing around for months. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just kissing me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. I could feel his breath on my face, warm and steady. Okay, he asked, his voice thick. Okay, I breathed out, the single word carrying the weight of all my relief, all my hope. The next morning, I woke up to a familiar feeling, dread. The light filtering through my blinds felt too bright, the silence of my apartment too loud. The events of the night before felt dreamlike, a perfect little movie I had played in my head. The cynical prosecutor was back, cross-examining the memory. He was just caught up in the moment. It was the chase he liked. Now that he has you, he'll be gone. He's probably regretting it right now. I checked my phone, my heart sinking with every empty second on the lock screen. No new messages. Of course. I spent the day in a haze of self-recrimination and anxiety. I tried to work, but the pixels on my screen just swam before my eyes. Every time my phone was silent, it was another piece of evidence that I had been a fool. The quiet of my apartment, which Leo had claimed to understand, now felt like a suffocating judgment. Just as I was about to give in to despair and order a pizza for one, my phone buzzed. It was him. My hands shook as I opened the message. I woke up thinking about your smile. It was so simple, so direct. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a continuation. I read it 3 times, letting the words sink in, a warm wave of relief washing over me. I typed back, my fingers flying. You've barely ever seen it. The reply was fast. I'm hoping to change that. Free tonight. We didn't go out. He came over. I spent an hour frantically cleaning my apartment, hiding my sad, single-person clutter, and trying to make it look like a cool, interesting person lived there. When he knocked on the door, my heart was pounding. He stood there, holding a brown paper bag that smelled like Thai food. He was wearing a faded university sweatshirt and looked so beautifully normal it made my chest ache. I figured you might be a creature of habit with food, too, he said, with that small, private smile. Decided to introduce you to something new. It was the most comfortable evening of my life. We sat on my floor, eating pad thai out of cardboard boxes and talking. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his family in a small town upstate, his dream of one day owning a little plot of land, not for farming, but just for the quiet. I told him about my parents, who had retired to Florida, and how I'd fallen into graphic design because I was better at communicating with images than with words. There were no pretenses. He didn't seem to be judging my small apartment or my quiet life. He seemed at home. Later, we were on the couch, the empty food containers on the coffee table. A baseball game was on the TV, the volume low. He wasn't touching me, but he was sitting close, his knee pressed against mine. The familiar, quiet tension was back, but this time it wasn't laced with anxiety. It was laced with possibility. I felt him looking at me and turned from the screen. He was watching me with a soft, curious expression. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Just this is nice." "It is," I agreed. He reached out, not for my hand, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair off my forehead. His fingers lingered for a second on my temple. It was an act of such simple, uncomplicated tenderness it almost broke me. All the walls I had so carefully constructed around my heart seemed to crumble into dust. I didn't think. I just acted. I leaned in and kissed him. This time it was my turn to initiate, my turn to close the distance. He responded instantly, his hand moving from my temple to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. It was a deeper kiss than the one on the street, more confident, full of all the things we hadn't said yet. We ended up just lying on the couch, my head on his chest, his arm wrapped around me. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my ear. The low murmur of the baseball announcers filled the silence. It was perfect. "You know," I said into his sweatshirt, the words muffled. "For a long time, I thought you were straight." I felt the rumble of his laugh in his chest. "I know," he said. "I kind of figured. I was laying it on pretty thick, and you still looked at me like I was a math problem you couldn't solve." "You were a math problem I couldn't solve," I admitted. He tightened his arm around me. "Am I solved now?" I tilted my head back to look at him. His eyes were warm in the dim light of the TV. "Getting there," I said. He smiled and leaned down to kiss me again, a soft, lingering kiss that felt like a promise for 1,000 more quiet nights just like this one. The off-season passed in a blur of firsts. Our first time cooking dinner together in my kitchen. Our first weekend trip out of the city to a little cabin by a lake where the only sound was the wind in the trees. Our first real argument, a stupid, tense fight about something I can't even remember, followed by the terrifying, beautiful relief of making up. With each passing day, Leo chipped away at my loneliness. He filled my quiet apartment with his easy laughter and the smell of his coffee in the morning. He learned my routines not to disrupt them, but to become a part of them. He never pushed me to be more outgoing or different than who I was. He just seemed to like the person I already was, the quiet, serious man from Section 112. When spring training started, a familiar anxiety began to creep back in. The stadium, our place, would soon be full of people again. He would be back in his uniform, back to being Leo the friendly usher, and I would be back in my seat. I worried it would feel different, that the magic of our private world would dissipate in the roar of the crowd. On opening day, I walked to my seat, my stomach in knots. I saw him at the top of the aisle, looking impossibly handsome in his crisp polo. He was directing a family, giving them that same charming smile. My heart gave a painful little lurch. He saw me. His professional smile faltered for a second, replaced by something softer, something just for me. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod before turning back to his job. I sat down in seat 4. It felt different. It was still my seat, but it no longer felt like a solitary island. It felt like one end of a connection. I watched him work, and the sight no longer filled me with longing and uncertainty. It filled me with a quiet, steady warmth. He was my Leo. At the end of the game, as the crowds thinned, he made his way down to me, just like he had that first time. He leaned against the seat in front of me, a casual, familiar posture. "Enjoy the game?" he asked, his eyes sparkling. "It was okay," I said, a smile playing on my lips. "Bullpen's still a mess." He laughed. Always, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It was a folded piece of paper, worn and soft at the edges. He unfolded it. It was my ticket stub from last season. "Still got it," he said, his voice soft. He held it out to me. Figured you might want it back. I looked at the ticket, then back at his face. No, I said, shaking my head. You keep it. He smiled, that slow, perfect smile that I had fallen in love with. He carefully folded the ticket and tucked it back into his pocket, patting it once. Okay, he said. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine in front of God and the few remaining fans in Section 11.